So, the bad guys lost again, 31-14 to the hated Los Angeles Chargers, and honestly, it wasn't even that close. And before we get into everything, I need to address the elephant in the room. Ian Rapoport just came out and officially confirmed that Pete Carroll is on the hot seat. Yeah, you heard that right. The win now coach in Las Vegas has not done very much winning at all, and now his job is officially in jeopardy after just one single season as the Raiders head coach. What's up, Raider Nation? Welcome to the NFL Playbook Raiders. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. This channel is all about breaking down everything you need to know about the Raiders. Look, we've now fallen to 2-10, losing our sixth straight game. This is a disaster, and I never really got confirmation before that management, whether that's Mark Davis, Tom Brady, or John Spytek, was seriously considering moving on from Pete Carroll after just one season. They signed him a 3-year contract in the offseason, so this is huge news. And honestly, I think Pete Carroll needs to be fired. I don't see any real viable future with him at this stage of his career. He's the oldest NFL head coach in history, and I don't see any positives with this football team either. But let me back up and talk about what actually happened in this game, because it was ugly. Really ugly. Gino Smith went 18 of 23 for 165 yards with 2 touchdowns and an interception. His QBR was 59.8. But here's the problem. He was sacked 5 times for 40 yards loss. 5 times. Meanwhile, Justin Herbert, playing with a hand injury that he's going to need surgery on, was only sacked 3 times for 11 yards. That tells you everything you need to know about the difference between these two teams. Ashton Jeanty had 15 carries for 31 yards. That's just a little bit over 2 yards per carry. And it's a miracle he even got that much because he was getting hit in the backfield on every single play. Again, nothing different from what we've been seeing all season. He has no chance to get positive yardage on these plays. The offensive line is absolutely terrible. We cannot open up holes to run the football effectively. Jeanty ended up with 21 touches for 61 yards total when you include his receiving. That's about 3 yards a touch. That's rough, man. The only bright spot offensively was Brock Bowers. 4 catches for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. The kid is a stud. He made 2 incredible plays, but besides that, this offense is not good at all. Defensively, Jeremy Chin had 17 tackles and Devin White had 11 tackles, but the majority of those tackles were like 5, 6, 7, 8 yards down the field. They weren't stopping guys at the line of scrimmage or anything like that. Now I want to talk about someone who actually showed up. Max Crosby had an insane game. 9 tackles from the defensive end position, 6 solo, 2 sacks, 4 tackles for loss. The man is a freaking beast. Kyle Blue Kelly had a pick too, but that's about it for anything positive. Now let me tell you where this game was really lost. Third down efficiency. We were 2 for 8. They were 12 for 17. 12 for 17. That is insane. That's like 3 out of every 4 third downs they converted. We were 1 out of every 4. That's crazy. They had 20 more plays than us, basically 200 more yards than us. And they weren't all short third downs either. I hear the narrative, oh, we got to keep them out of 3rd and short and more manageable. No, there were a lot of 3rd and 8s and 3rd and 10s and 3rd and 15s sometimes even that they were getting. We just weren't doing a good job of tackling. That's the long and short of it. The big play that killed us was that toss play in the 3rd quarter. We had momentum going into halftime, tied the game up, and then they come out with that big toss play. Pete Carroll said they had 3 guys there that could have made the play, and it winds up being a 60-yard touchdown. That was a back-breaking play. After that, we needed to respond, and we didn't have it. They got out by a couple scores, and that falls right into their hands because they know how to play with a lead. Here's what really gets me. The Chargers were missing their 2 starting offensive tackles, and they still ran for 193 yards on us. Kamadi Vidal had 25 carries for 126 yards. Jared Patterson kicked in 11 carries for 54 yards. Each of them had a touchdown. Overall, take away the quarterbacks, they had 36 carries for 180 yards. That's around 5-point-something yards per carry. And you know why? Because they've invested in their offensive line with free agency and high draft picks, and they're letting them go out there and play. We really haven't done that. Now let's get to the real issue here, and this is where Ian Rapoport's report becomes so important. Rapoport also touched on the Chip Kelly situation, and this is critical. He said that people who know this offense very well, people who studied it and played against it, do not believe it was Chip Kelly's offense. They believe it was Pete Carroll's offense, specifically the Pete Carroll offense from Seattle 2023. Rapoport even said it sounds like if Chip Kelly had to do this again, he would not have taken this job. Think about that for a second. This is the 2nd coordinator that Pete Carroll has fired this season, and now we're finding out that Chip Kelly really didn't have the freedom to run the offense he truly wanted. Pete Carroll essentially forced his hand. And you saw in today's game, after firing Chip Kelly, the offense was still terrible. To me, Chip Kelly was a scapegoat. The real issue is that the offensive line is absolutely terrible, and our wide receiver group is definitely one of the worst in terms of talent in the whole National Football League. A lot of times, wide receivers aren't getting open. Sometimes we're just only having 2 wide receivers go down the field for routes because we're trying to go like a max protect concept to try to keep Gino Smith clean. The offensive line is not really good at run blocking, and they've also given up a ton of sacks this season. This really has been a recipe for disaster for this offense. And here's the thing. Pete Carroll was the guy that vouched for Gino Smith. He's the one that wanted us to go out there, trade draft capital for him, and Gino Smith has been playing absolutely terrible. Now, sure, part of that is definitely the offensive line, but there's also been examples on film several different occasions this season where guys are open, but he's just not hitting it. He either doesn't see it, misses a throw, throws it late, things of that nature. Let me tell you what happened in Gino's press conference because it was infuriating. They asked him what happened on the drives where they didn't move the ball, and his answer was just, I got to be better. That's it. No specifics. He didn't say I need to get the ball out quicker. I need to recognize what's happening quicker. I need to not hold the ball so long. Just, I got to be better. He's not falling on the sword for the offense. He's blowing off the reporter. He's blowing off the question. I think Gino doesn't think he's the problem. But we saw in this game that, yeah, he did get pressured quite a bit, but there were a lot of times where he hung on the ball way too long, and a lot of times where when his first read wasn't open, he looked at the rush and grabbed the ball and got sacked. That's on Gino, not the offensive line or the receivers. But offensive line coaching is another huge issue, and guess who we have to point towards for that? Pete Carroll once again, because he chose to have his son, Brennan Carroll, be the offensive line coach. And surprisingly, this offensive line actually looks worse than the offensive line we saw last year, and that offensive line was bad as well. We don't have the talent you need to have one of the top offensive lines in the league, but there's also just a lot of dumb mistakes, a lot of miscommunication issues, a lot of technique issues that boil down to coaching. And that starts and ends with Pete Carroll. Now let me address the people who are screaming fire everyone and start over. Every time you do that, the team gets worse. Your roster gets worse. You're better off using Pete Carroll as a steady influence and building the roster for a few years and then bringing someone else in because there's something to work with. When you're coming in with nothing to work with, it just gets worse because you're just trying to patch everything together. This is what you get when the NFL forces you to get rid of John Gruden, and then you don't hire Rich Bisaccia, and you bring in Josh McDaniels, who cleans house and gets rid of a bunch of players. Then you don't like him, and you bring in Antonio Pierce, and you don't give him the tools to win, and you clean house again. You set him up to fail by not giving him the quarterback, by not signing his running back. Then you get rid of him, and the next guy comes in, and you clean house again. All these bad drafts, all these bad picks in free agency, all this stuff is coming back to haunt us. Look at other teams. How long was Matt Eberflus with the Bears? He was there for a few years, even though they weren't doing well. He was there for a few years, and they were building up draft picks and building the team underneath him. When he left, they got the coach they wanted. What happened in Indy? They didn't get rid of Shane Steichen. They kind of left him alone and let him work through some issues with the quarterback, but he was still building the team, building the team, building the team. That's what you got to do. You can't sit here and flip coaches left and right one year after the next. But here's my problem. This is the part that makes it very difficult for me to preach patience for the long term. What have we seen this season that we can build off of? The running game, even though we spent the number 6 pick on a running back, the running game is no better than it was last season. The passing game, even though we spent a bunch of money on a quarterback, really isn't any better than it was last season. Brock Bowers is still a stud, but guess what? He was a stud last year. What has Pete Carroll brought to the table? Offensively, we're one of the worst offenses in the league. Defensively, we're one of the worst on third down in the league. Special teams is a mess. Our tackling is atrocious. What has gotten better? It doesn't really look like this team is fighting for him either. Pete Carroll seems very stubborn, stuck in his ways, doesn't really want to play younger players, and it just really feels like Pete Carroll has his fingerprints all over this football team. A lot of the issues with this team stem back to him making decisions and ultimately making mistakes when it comes to forming his coaching staff that have really affected the Raiders' performance this year. The Raiders are headed towards a season where they're going to have a top 3 draft pick. I would not be shocked if we end with like a 3-14 overall record. Maybe we can beat the New York Giants down the line, but at this point, I don't think that win would really be worth it. We're not going to be good next year anyway. We need to build, and you need to use the coach for some consistency, the same GM and same coach for some consistency. Teams don't flip around one year to the next when they have a new coach year after year after year.